I mean, what's the significance of it in this class? You all have seen it in Biology 103 too, right?
Yeah.
This isn't the first time you're seeing it. So what does it have to do with? Besides just a bunch of chemicals. Aerobic cell respiration. What do you all remember about it?
Aerobic means oxygen, right? Like, you be able to take oxygen.
Something to do with oxygen.
Those are the chemicals we need to live.
Good. Good. So these are the chemicals we need to live, right? We've talked about this I don't know how many times already. Glucose and oxygen. Why they're important?
Blood.
The sugar gives us energy and oxygen.
So glucose and oxygen flows through our blood to go where? You all paying attention?
Our organs.
Yeah, help me out. Stay with me. So glucose and oxygen are important because of this, right? So what does glucose and oxygen do? That's what these questions are. So where does it take place, first of all? So this reaction, aerobic cellular respiration, where does it take place?
In the blood. In the whole body. Every cell of the body.
In every cell of the body. So it takes place in our cells, right? These questions are going to be on something. Make sure you all get it. All right. So where does this reaction take place? Aerobic cell respiration takes place where?
Every cell of the body.
Every cell of our body. So all cells, all living things that have cells, this reaction takes place. And what is, now let's go back to the significance. Why does this have to take place in every cell of our body?
As you said, be active.
What is it doing for us, our cells?
Get energy.
It's a reaction. It's just mixing two things together, and we get something when those two things mix together. Look at the rest of the equation.
Water, carbon dioxide.
Like, it's nutrients. Basis of
Energy.
What's the significance of ATP?
Energy.
It's what our cells use as an energy source, right? So in order for anything to do anything to do work, there has to be a source of energy, right? So our energy is food. To turn on the lights and computers, what's the energy source? Electricity. In order for your car to move, what's the energy source?
Gas.
Gasoline. So in order for anything to do work, it has to have what? Some source of what? Energy. So what's the energy source for our cells? So when our cells want to do anything,
Glucose and oxygen.
the cells need ATP. Okay? So the significance of this reaction is that it allows the cell to make its energy source, which is ATP. Y'all got that? So what's the significance of aerobic cellular respiration? It allows our cells to create energy so that the cells can do work. So whenever a cell is not able to make ATP, what happens to that cell? It dies. Okay? Now let's connect that with something. What happens with a stroke? So if blood is not flowing to the brain, those brain cells are not, why? Because they're not able to make ATP.
That's in the bloodstream.
What's in the bloodstream?
Glucose.
So our blood, which is why this is discussed in this chapter, our blood is sending glucose and oxygen to all the cells. So those cells are able to make what? ATP. So if a person has a stroke, which means blood is not flowing through one of the vessels, if that vessel is carrying oxygen and glucose to the postcentral gyrus, and now that blood vessel is blocked and blood can't get to the postcentral gyrus, those cells can't get ATP, so those cells die. That's a stroke. What happens with heart attack? Myocardial infarction. We'll get to that in chapter 19. Same thing, but there, the coronary arteries, which y'all are learning about. So notice on the outside of the heart, there are arteries and veins, just like the other parts of the body. So the coronary arteries' job is to supply the muscle cells of the heart muscle cells, with glucose and oxygen, so those cells can make ATP. So those cells can what? Contract. Pump, right? In order for the heart to pump, those muscles have to contract. In order for muscles to contract, those muscles need what?
ATP.
Energy, ATP. So if those coronary arteries are blocked, glucose and oxygen are not getting to some part of the heart. So whatever part of the heart those blood vessels are sending oxygen and glucose to, now those parts of the heart aren't getting it if the blood vessels are blocked, the coronary arteries are blocked. Okay, so just about everything we can talk about. If you think of things that cause sudden death, drowning. So why does drowning cause death?
Too much acid.
You can't, don't have glucose, oxygen in the lungs.
So if you're suffocating, if you're drowning, that means you're not getting oxygen into the blood, so therefore oxygen can be sent to the body cells, and the cells start to die. Okay? So that's the significance of the reaction. Aerobic cellular respiration makes sure that the cells have the raw materials needed in order to convert that to ATP, which is the source of energy for the cell. Where does it take place? Every cell in your body. Why does it take place? Can our cells live if they are unable to carry out this reaction? No. Why?
Because we need glucose and oxygen to produce the ATP. Because without it, we can't do anything.
Exactly. And what role does the circulatory system play to ensure that all body cells can carry out this reaction?
It flows the glucose and the oxygen throughout the bloodstream to get to different parts of the body.
There you go. So the role of the circulatory system, which we're on now, is to make sure that oxygen and glucose is being sent to every cell of the body. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of what of the main purpose of the circulatory system. Making sure that all the body cells get the nutrients they need in order to make energy for the cells. All right, any questions on that? Okay, so allows us to maintain fluid balance and stabilize pH of the extracellular fluid, as well as control of body temperature. All right. So one of the things you will see is the normal pH of blood. Make sure you know that the normal pH of blood is between 7.35 and 7.45. So that means our blood is normally, what, slightly acidic or slightly basic? Because neutral would be what?
7.
What's neutral pH?
7.
7.0.
Yeah, it's 7.
7.00. So here, 7.35 to 7.45, the pH is higher than neutral, so that means that our blood is normally slightly basic. Okay? Because anything above 7.0 is basic, everything below 7.0 is acidic. So the cells of blood are red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. So those are what I call the formed elements of blood. And then the material outside is the extracellular matrix, and this is what we refer to as the blood plasma. So everything in the blood except for the cells. Blood volume, it makes up about 7% of the body weight in liters. So adult males, 5 to 6 liters, and females, 4 to 5 liters of blood. And this slide is just giving you the functions, general functions of each of the formed elements, the types of formed elements. So red blood cells are erythrocytes. So the word root, erythro, refers to red blood cells. Leuco, well, erythro means red, the color red. Let me say it that way. And leuco means white. Okay, so those just refer to the colors. What are cytes?
Sites,
So whenever you see cytes,
cells.
that's referring to cells, right? So red cells, white cells is what the terms mean. Okay, so we'll see that red blood cells' job, we'll talk mostly in this chapter about red blood cells, and their job is to transport the oxygen. Okay, so as we talked before, oxygen has to be transported to body cells. The oxygen actually attaches to the cytoplasm, structures within the cytoplasm of red blood cells. So that means red blood cells' job is to transport oxygen. Leukocytes, or white blood cells, are part of the immune system, so they help to fight off foreign materials, pathogens that may be in the body. And there are 5 types of leukocytes, and these are the leukocytes by name. In this chapter, I don't go too much into the white blood cells. We're focusing mainly on the red blood cells. In the immune system chapters, where we get mostly into the roles of the leukocytes. And then we have the platelets. Now, platelets, they're formed elements of blood, but a lot of times you think of them as cells, but they're really fragments of cells. They're cell fragments. They're not complete cells. In fact, there's a larger cell called a megakaryocyte, and the megakaryocyte breaks into small pieces or fragments to make up the platelets. So the platelets come from what are called megakaryocytes, larger cells. So this slide shows you the differences in the types of formed elements and their appearance in relation to one another. So notice the platelets are very tiny, small fragments. The red blood cells look uniform. They have a thick ridge and thin on the inside, kind of like old Lifesavers candies used to look. And one thing you'll notice about white blood cells is all white blood cells, you can see that they have a nucleus, but the nucleus has a different shape in each type of white blood cell. Okay, and then some white blood cells have granules in the cytoplasm, and those are referred to as granulocytes. And white blood cells that don't have granules are referred to as agranulocytes. All right, hematocrit. So hematocrit is one big area for you all to know about. So how do we determine hematocrit? First of all, what do we mean when we say hematocrit? So if your hematocrit is low, what does that mean? Something like that. But specifically, it's referring to something specific. Packed cell volume, but what specifically are we talking about in terms of, now that we know the components of blood? You have red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, plasma. So hematocrit has to do with how many red blood cells you have in relation to your whole blood. So when your blood is drawn, the blood is drawn into a tube, and when they spin the tube down, everything heavy is pulled to the bottom of the tube. So the heaviest components of blood are red blood cells. So all they have to do is look at the total amount, whatever the percentage of red blood cells there are is your hematocrit. So hematocrit is the percent of red blood cells that you have in your whole blood. So it's a measure of your red blood cells. Keep that in mind. Okay, so hematocrit is a measure of the amount of red blood cells that you have, and that should be in a particular range. So if your whole blood is checked, the amount of red blood cells you should have is between 37 and 52% of the whole blood volume. Okay, so here, and there's a difference. For men, it's going to be slightly higher, like 42 to 52, and for women, it'll be between 37 and 45, somewhere in that range. So women are on the lower end of that, but this is the normal range.
Is there a reason why men have more than women?
They're
Like,
bigger.
we lose more than women?
Yeah, they're usually larger. Men are larger, yeah. But there are other reasons also. Also testosterone, androgens increase the amount of red blood cells. And for women, of course, we lose blood periodically. And there's also a inverse relationship to body fat content in blood cell formation. So men tend to have less body fat than women. So those are some of the reasons. Leukocytes and platelets make up only 1% of blood volume, so very small amount of white blood cells compared to red blood cells. In fact, if you have 2 or 3% white blood cells, that should tell you something, or your doctor something. What might that be?
Trying to find out some type of infection.
Some type of infection, likely, right? Because white blood cells' job is to what? Fight infection. So that could let them know. And also the type of white blood cell. Depending on what type of infection it is, they'll see more neutrophils, for example, rather than eosinophils. So all of those kind of tell them what type of infection there may be. Okay, so hematocrit. Now, so you're going to have to come back to this because some of the questions, once we get into the chapter, we'll talk about conditions where there may be too many red blood cells or too few. So instead of saying too many or too few, I might say a hematocrit of 30% or a hematocrit of 60%. So you would have to know what that means in terms of the amount of red blood cells. If there's too many red blood cells, so if the hematocrit is, say, 60%, that's referred to as polycythemia. So that's a term you will see in your study notes too. Polycythemia. Polycythemia. And so polycythemia is where there's an abundance or more red blood cells than normal. And if there are fewer, that's anemia.